Good morning, everybody. Welcome to today's webinar. I have a little bit of housekeeping to do before we actually begin today's webinar. Today's session is TED and Libraries, Ideas Worth Sharing in Places Designed for Sharing. My name is Amber Painter, and I'm the Southwest Regional Coordinator from the Indiana State Library's Professional Development Office, and I'll be the host and question moderator for today. Our presenters this morning are Jennifer Borland, Executive Director of TEDx Bloomington, and Kevin McDowell, Teen Services and Digital Creativity Strategist from Monroe County Public Library. I'd like to just go over a little bit of housekeeping. So today's webinar is part of our series Tools, Tips, and Trends. And if you'd like to register for this for other webinars in the series or just different webinars that are provided by the Indiana State Library, you can do that through our Indiana State Library events calendar, which can be located on our website, or you can go through our Continuing Education Toolkit website. The Indiana State Library has many ways we try to stay connected to library staff across the state. For weekly updates on upcoming trainings and to learn more about what's happening in libraries across the state, please subscribe to our weekly e-newsletter, The Wednesday Word. We also offer a blog which provides information about the Indiana State Library's collection, interview spotlights on library staff from across the state, and information about upcoming events at the Indiana State Library. If you have a question, just type it in the chat box on the upper left-hand side of the screen. I'll be watching and I'll try to get to your questions from the presenters as soon as possible. For the most part, we will be waiting until the end of the presentation to really address questions, but if there's something that needs more clarification in the moment, please enter your question and we can address that as the presenters are presenting. Today's session is going to be roughly 50 minutes long. It'll be followed by a question and answer session, and everyone who attends will qualify for 1 LEU. If at any point during the webinar you experience any sound issues, please see the sound issues box that's located below the chat box on the left side of the screen. If there's a global sound issue, we'll announce it in the chat pod. If you're unable to resolve the sound issues you are experiencing, we are recording the meeting today, and you can watch it online after the meeting has ended. Again, if there's a global sound issue, we will make an announcement in the chat box. So without further ado, I'm going to turn the presentation over to Kevin and Jen.
And digital creativity strategist at the Monroe County Public Library. In my job, I am sort of the Uber community engagement librarian overseeing the 2 spaces in the Monroe County Public Library, the teen space, which we call the ground floor, which is an exciting, rather large place in the library, service point in the library for teens to hang out, mess around, and geek out. And adjacent to that space is the Digital Creativity Center, which is an all ages maker space for digital media production, 2 audio recording studios, video production studio with green screen, and then desktop workstations with a whole mess of software, including the full Adobe Creative Suite. And
that's a lot.
That's a lot.
That's a lot of stuff. People should come and check it out.
Please.
And I'm Jennifer Borland. I am the executive producer of TEDx Bloomington. And I was just kind of launching into the fact that we've run 3 big TED events here in Bloomington, so 3 TEDx Bloomington events. And then more recently, we've been kind of experimenting with different types of programs to engage the community, and a large number of those have involved the library. So I think this is a really exciting opportunity to talk about some of the things that we've been able to do through formal and informal partnerships with the library here in Bloomington. All right. So how did we come together? How did TED and the library come together? This is our story.
Well, one of the neat things about my job, again, being the Uber community engaged librarian, and as someone who's been in the Bloomington community for years and years, people frequently, and I hope this happens in your libraries too, I imagine they do, see the library as a potential partner, and will oftentimes we don't have to do a whole lot, and we get emails that in our inbox and phone calls in our and people dropping by to say we want to work with the library. And one day when I was working at the library, a parent of kids that were coming into the space regularly to hang out and play video games and socialize and whatnot, Lucy McKean. And when I asked Lucy what she did other than parent her two gangly teens, she talked about her involvement in TEDx Bloomington. And I was new to my position and had a lot of and a lot of excitement about trying to find ways to partner with different organizations. And so Lucy and I talked about how TEDx Bloomington and the library's teen space, just as the sort of the title of our webinar indicates, there is a lot of overlap of ideas worth sharing and spaces that excel in sharing. And so we decided to get together and talk about what each other does and had coming up around the bend and try to find some ways that we might be able to collaborate. And Lucy said that she was going to invite her colleague, Jennifer Borland. And we met. Those of you who have been to Bloomington, I saw on the chat, some of you graduated from IU School of Library Information Science. Well, then you remember the lovely patio of Laughing Planet, and that was where our story took its next turn. When we met and said, what are you doing? What are you doing? What am I doing? Can we do it together? I'll book the auditorium.
Yep. And Lucy, we'll give a shout out. A curator in TED is kind of the top person. So even though executive producer probably sounds like, ooh, you're making it all happen, the curator is really key because content is so important to the TED brand and everything is very carefully curated in every TED or TEDx program. So Lucy holds the license for our local program and is a wonderful person to work with. All right, so what is TED? I guess our assumption is that if you're here listening live today or listening to the recording of this, you probably have at least heard of TED, or maybe when you saw it and didn't know what it was, you might have looked it up. But we were kind of curious if people knew what the T and the E and the D stand for. So it's not a person, they're actually acronyms. But if you want to throw those up in the chat window and share out your ideas, I'd be curious to kind of see what people think the T, the E, and the D stand for.
And don't be tempted to Google it.
Yeah, no cheating. The honor system.
We have tech, entertainment, design, technology, entertainment.
Yeah. You guys got it right off the bat, so you're good. Because usually people are stumped by the E, especially just because so many of the popular talks have been about education. So some that really rose to fame and were very widespread and viewed very highly were education oriented. So a lot of people assume erroneously that the E is ed, but it's actually entertainment. So kudos to the folks who got that one correct. But it is technology, entertainment, and design, and kind of things that are at the intersection of those in different ways. So sometimes things are purely technology or purely design, and sometimes they're kind of overlapping in different ways.
Well, and that's why, as a ukulele player myself, and I'm a big fan of Jake Shimabukuro, I too thought that for the longest time TED was technology and education, and then I started noticing more and more musical artists performing, including my favorite ukulele artist, Jake Shimabukuro, and I think that's also a neat intersection for libraries because libraries are places that check out DVDs and CDs, and sometimes librarians have this struggle of, oh, I wish they would check out more books than DVDs, but we have to remind ourselves that entertainment is very important in our lives and can provide much inspiration, and it's something that we ought to be providing equitable access to as much as books that can educate, but entertainment that can inspire as well.
So a little bit about TED and the difference between TED and TEDx, because I think, I hadn't really thought about the library intersection in terms of all those things too. That was a really good point. So TED goes back to 1984, so it's been around for a really long time, and I think its rise to popularity has really come probably over the last decade and the latter part of that decade especially, to the point where it really is something that's not only known, but it's often parodied and in popular media. So it's kind of out there. The point where they're making fun of you on Saturday Night Live, I guess you've arrived. But it's attended by, thousands of people every year. Are we okay? It's really a global thing now. So they have a TED Global event annually, in addition to the big TED conference, which is now held in Vancouver on an annual basis. They also have TED Women, TED Youth, lots of different kind of additionally branded things that are kind of curated by the TED team. So we call it Big TED because it's like the parent organization, like the big one that people pay thousands of dollars to attend. Like these are really big, fancy things that you apply to attend. You don't just buy a ticket. You have to be chosen to be a member of the audience based on your interests and things like that. So it's a kind of a big deal. And then TEDx, however, is an independent event. So there's still an application process to host the event. So an organization signs up for a license to be a TEDx branded event. And there's a pretty lengthy application process, but it's not too painful. But communities all over the world are participating in TEDx programs to the point where more than 50,000 TEDx talks have been given, and that's the result of more than 10,000 different TEDx events, literally all over the world. With the exception of maybe like the South Pole, I think there's probably been a TEDx event on just about every continent. And I just saw this today on their website that they've had over 1 billion views of TEDx talks, which is really exciting. And just another little fun fact and bragging point here, from our first TEDx Bloomington event, we had Sean Acor speak, and he is one of the top 10 TEDx talks of all time, and he has alone over, I think, 1 million views. So he's contributing to that 1 billion in a pretty nice way. So check that one out if you haven't seen that one yet. Congratulations,
Shannon Brake, who had guessed that information before you offered it.
Oh, well, good. Yeah. So talking a little bit about kind of what our formal partnership was, we kind of came together with the ideas like, let's do this TEDx Youth thing. Like this seems to be maybe a good fit with the library and with Kevin's interests, working particularly with the teens. And so we did our first event, and we tried to drum up some interest with the youth. We hosted the event. This is a picture of the stage here in the library, and we'll have some other pictures too. We have a wonderful auditorium here in the Monroe County Public Library, which is a phenomenal place to host events. But we didn't get great attendance. So we had a handful, maybe 10 or so teens that trickled in and out of the room over the course of the day, where we were basically live streaming videos from TED Youth. So which again was a kind of a global oriented event. I believe that one took place in New York City for teens in that city, and I think folks who had traveled from afar, but then we were simulcasting it essentially. We did do an after party at ground floor afterwards. So the teens that weren't quite willing to trickle into the auditorium were willing to kind of sit there as we continued to view some of the live stream while having cookies and other snacks. And that seemed to be a little bit more popular. So recapping on our first event, I'll let Kevin tell you a few of the things that we learned from that experience.
Well, it is true that there were very, very few kids who came to the auditorium. And in fact, I could give a whole webinar about some of the challenges that we face in the ground floor. Although the ground floor teen hangout space is highly successful in that we have dozens of kids every day after school hanging out, messing around, and geeking out, we've also created a situation where teens sort of don't want to be anywhere else in the library. You could put Bruno Mars on the stage in the auditorium, and my teens are still going to probably not leave the comforts of the teen space to walk the 40 yards over to the auditorium to see Uptown Funk. And so what we were trying to do was recreate that atmosphere in the auditorium, because it's not uncommon for us to use our large screen that's hooked up to a Mac Mini. We're frequently pulling up videos, and kids are free to watch videos or go to websites their own. And we had watched a few TED Talks in the past on this screen. And so we thought, well, let's just do this in the auditorium and try to create some excitement around that. But I think that we probably had less than 10 people throughout the whole day come. And in fact, they were not even teens that we regularly see in the teen space. But then afterwards, we did have the cookies, and we decided to do the after party. And one of the things that we'll hit at several times today probably is what worked there was cookies or food, any food thing, and trying to do something that's engaging to teens in the space itself, because it's clear to us that it's very hard to get them to leave.
So in all of this kind of sparked an idea for, hey, rather than having this one big event during the year, let's think about something that we can do on an ongoing basis. So maybe, we can engage the youth in a fashion that's going to get them kind of thinking more about ideas and engaging more on topics, and might want to be more of a part of another event. Are we good audio-wise?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So we started a TED Ed Club, and Kevin, I think you can talk to a little bit about what was involved with that, but basically just to give you a little bit of perspective on what TED Ed is. So this is a formal TED program. They're largely in schools, and it can be started by anyone over the age of 13. So I think the idea is that it can be started by an educator of some sort, or also started by youth themselves, which I think is kind of a cool idea in and of itself. But globally, there are, again, more than 3,000 TED Ed clubs, again, in many, many countries. And then locally, I'll let you talk a little bit about kind of how you started that process.
Sure. Well, I had never heard of the TED Ed Club, but when Lucy and Jennifer and I met after the event that wasn't entirely successful, and asked, okay, what have we learned? We're certainly, I know many of us talk a lot about not being afraid to fail. We weren't afraid to fail, so we thought, let's come at this and learn from it and try something different. They told me that there was this thing called the TED Ed Club, and as the person who provides oversight of the ground floor and for teen services, I was the one who signed up to be a facilitator or host or presenter. I don't remember exactly what it was called, and my point here also is that navigating through TED information online has been very confusing to me. Now, I do have my Master's of Library Science, so it's my job. I've been trained to sift through information on the web and make meaning out of it and find, separate the wheat from the chaff and all that. But boy, I was highly confused, and I do think that they, and even Jennifer, you remarked that you have found that frustrating for you as well, that their online presence sometimes is a little confusing. And in fact, case in point, just about a month ago when Jennifer and I met to review our notes and to prepare for this webinar, we went to check out my account for being the facilitator of Monroe County Public Library's ground floor TED Ed Club. And it appears as if maybe I never actually, that the process was not finished, and there was maybe a confirmation email that there's a lot of confusion there. So I don't even know if we were ever officially running our club under the proper guidelines that TED Ed Club requests. But I will say this, what I wanted to do after we tried to do this event in the auditorium, there were other events I tried to host in the auditorium where kids didn't come, and I realized that we wanted to experiment with doing effective programming in the teen space itself, where we're asking kids to hang out, mess around, and geek out. And it's a very wide open format. It's a large space where you can play video games over here, work on crafts over here, socialize on the couch over here. But we do have a volunteer mentor program where people who want to work with teens and help guide the teens and navigate their use of the space through coming in once a week can do that. And I always encourage the mentors to bring activities of their own. And so I suggested to Jen and Lucy, and Jen took the bait and decided that she would come into the space technically as a volunteer mentor, but then also to help facilitate activities related to being an either official or unofficial, as it may be, TED Ed Club.
Yeah. And the long story short is like, yes, you can go through the official routes, but you can also have really successful TED events just tapping into TED resources. And we'll talk a little bit more about how we've done that for the broader community in addition to our teen programs as well. But yeah, so I've been coming up until the beginning of the summer. I took a short hiatus, but on a monthly basis, and we would do a different theme each month. So we'll show a few photos from that. So this was from a themed event that we did on robotics. There's a lot of phenomenal, like amazing talks on robotics and some really, really cool innovative things through TED and TEDx talks as well. And so we brought in, this is Pleo. He's a dinosaur robot that the kids were able to play with. And we also built solar robots that day. So just kind of fun programming. And again, the teens could stop in for any part of that. The videos kind of play in the background. So hopefully they're going to hook them in and something they might sit and watch while somebody else takes over playing with the dinosaur. So that was an example of one. These are some others that we had done that we were building hydroponic gardens. So again, there are, like, on pretty much any topic you can come up with, there's probably 10 to 20 really good TED Talks or TEDx Talks, and lots of great stuff on sustainable gardening. So this was one of the early ones that we did, and we just used water bottles and socks. Believe it or not, our wicks are socks, and then we planted some seeds. I don't know that any of the gardens made it to maturation, but we had a lot of fun getting really dirty in the library while watching some really cool talks about sustainable gardening. The top one is Pi Day. We'll talk more about that here in a second. And then the one at the bottom was just one where we did really trying to get the teens to tell us some of the things that interest them about technology, entertainment, and design as a way to start fostering some ideas that we could apply toward the next TEDx Youth event that we would do locally. So our best practices, food keeps coming up, and it will definitely. So when we've, like, on the rare occasion when I've not brought food, it's crickets chirping. It's really, really hard to get them to come over, even if it's the coolest activity in the world or the most engaging video in the world. Having that food just helps to get them to come into your area and to engage with you. The other thing is just using an interesting hook, a theme that's timely. We did one around the Olympics. We did Christmas in July. We've done lots of things that are thematic but tie into something that's going to hook them in. And then we try to find short videos. So even though a TED Talk can be up to 18 minutes long, the ones that we pick for use with the TED Ed Club are usually no more, like maybe 10 at the absolute max, but most of them we try to find are about 5 minutes. So we're never asking a teen to sit down for a long period of time. And then just persistence. I think Kevin would attest to that some days you might only have 2 or 3 teens that would stop by, but other days, I mean, we've had groups, I would say about 15 to 20 kids over the course of the evening kind of coming and going, doing the activities depending on the level of engagement with whatever the topic or activity is.
And I will say about the food, and I don't think it is just TED Ed Club that we were doing once a month, that kids were not interested in TED until there was pizza. We have the same problem with much of the scheduled programming that we offer as librarians. That happens in the space because, again, there's so many things that kids can do on their own without participating in scheduled programming that we arrange, that we just know are going to help them to acquire 21st century literacy skills, that they can participate if they want to, or if they don't want to because they'd rather play Smash Brothers or talk with their friends, they can. And so that food element has become important, not just in these programs, but in many programs. Me and my colleagues, that other teen librarians, like to remind ourselves that pizza plus programming equals participation, the 3 Ps.
I like it. I like it. And it's also a form of entertainment, right? I mean, eating is fun.
Well, and these kids are coming to our space after school, and
Yeah,
and
they're
many
hungry.
and so they're coming between 3 and 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and of course, middle school and high schooler kids are eating their lunch at 10:30 in the morning. They are ravenously hungry as well as exhausted, physically and mentally when they get here.
So that leads us to our second TEDx Youth, and we note the date. It was originally called TEDx Bloomington Youth, and the second time around, with Kevin's input, we changed the name to TEDx Youth at Bloomington. Both of those are TED-approved versions of how you would kind of title something for a youth program. So, and TED does control, like you can't just say, I'm going to have TEDx most awesome event ever. Like that's the name of your event. Like they're very, it can be an organization, it can be a city or a location, but they control the parameters of how that's done. So this was a TED approved change, and we were excited about that. And I think it wholly contributed to the success of our second event in contrast to the first. And this time around, we ended up having 10 youth volunteers from 3 of our area high schools, which was awesome. So we had kind of broad participation on that front, which I think also helped in terms of the marketing to get participants. So we had about 50 attendees over the course of the afternoon. And that was really exciting too. So the youth themselves, we ended up partnering with youth outside of the teen center eventually. We couldn't get any of the teens to step up and say they wanted to talk. So to kind of seed the field, so to speak, we reached out to a local volunteer, a philanthropically minded theater group. So it was a theater group that a group of students from one of the local high schools had started, and they've done a series of productions to raise money for our local Boys and Girls Club. So we're like, okay, these are teens who are obviously really engaged.
Well, there's no adult involvement in Solarium Productions. They do everything entirely by themselves. They're highly motivated young people.
So we're super awesome to have them, but we figured like these are kids that want to get up on stage, that want to perform, that probably have some things to say. And sure enough, they did. So we met on I would say at least a monthly basis with them for about half a year to kind of line up the event, to decide who could talk, to figure out how we wanted to reach out, to think about what the event would look like. So they were really integrally involved in all of the planning associated with the event. A lot of the volunteering leading up to the event, they were the ones who recruited the people who videotaped the talks. They were the ones who helped to make the flyers and pass that out. And we helped with more of the logistics. So it really was an event that they owned. And like I said, we ended up with speakers from 3 different high schools, which was really exciting. We also had a performer who did kind of a live interactive bit with the audience. So we had our own entertainment component to our TEDx event. And it was a real success. I think they enjoyed the experience. We were amazed by the level of professionalism in terms of their talks. We're still working to get those online. There's a little bit of a lag in getting the video from those, so we're still working to get those online. But those will be available for people to see all over the world, which is kind of exciting too.
And one of the things that I would say about that needed to happen, and it's another thing that we are continually learning about our space. Our space has, again, it's very popular. We have a lot of kids after school that come to hang out, mess around, and geek out, anywhere from 20 to 60 kids on any given day. And a lot of times, people who want to partner with me are attracted to this group of teens that it is they have this idea that, oh, you have all these kids that are just waiting to participate in graphic design for a nonprofit organization, or plan a TEDx Youth at Bloomington event. And one of the things that we are learning is that out of the 20 to 60 kids that come every day to hang out in our space, there's still another 6,000 some teens that are maybe more likely to participate if we reach out to them, as opposed to considering our kids who are coming to the library as sitting ducks that are just going to naturally want to be involved in something when they're really coming to just have a fun space to hang out after school with their friends.
And even though we didn't, and we read about 15 minutes. But
Oh no, I had one minor thing. So Shannon Brake had a question about your first event. Did you offer any kind of speaker coaching?
We did. So and we didn't do full on like stand up and do your whole. I mean, like we did really informal. With our big events, we have done extensive coaching for those events. So the things that you would see if you Googled TEDx Bloomington are things where they've literally practiced for almost a year on those talks. With this, we did a little bit more informally. So we asked to see drafts of the youth scripts, and then we did kind of informal run-throughs. We did have a dress rehearsal where everybody got up on stage and kind of ran through their thing, and we gave them a few tips. So there were minor tweaks, but not the extensive coaching that we did for the larger event, largely because, just the timing, like getting them to commit, because these were kids that were involved in a lot of other things, in addition to running their own theater company.
Well, and being
other
theater
organizations.
kids, they needed potentially less coaching.
Yeah. So we didn't push them too hard on that, but it's certainly something, again, like our curator, Lucy, is an incredible speaker coach, and that she was willing to do that if any of them had wanted that. But I think the product that they delivered was still one that looked like they had a lot of coaching. Again, just because we ended up being able to work with some really bright kids this time around that had a lot of experience public speaking, but that's a great question. And then I guess to speak to the fight, so our original goal was to get the youth at ground floor engaged and really running the event, and we found that wasn't what happened. But the byproduct of what we ended up doing to get other kids in the community engaged was that we were bringing new teams to ground floor. So we were bringing them into the library space that they hadn't yet seen.
Right. So
it kind of served a different purpose, which was a mutually beneficial arrangement in the end. And we've talked a lot about these, so I think we can go through them pretty quickly, but in terms of the strength, tapping into ground floor, there was a lot of diversity, a lot of awesome youth that were already engaged in that had a lot of the tech experience because of the awesome resources that the library had. Kevin's interest in trying to find things that were relevant to them, was something that kind of meshed with our vision and mission of trying to, spread interesting ideas. TED itself has an abundance of great content. So TED Ed programs have bundled content, and TED Talks, there's millions of them, like I had mentioned, on just about every topic. So there's tons and tons of content to tap into, and then that ability to bring new youth into the library. And certainly the challenges, I think, Kevin had mentioned that competition for their attention when they're in such an awesome space as ground floor proved to be a little bit of a challenge for us. There was a little bit of time involved too, so when we had to branch out and find other participants and spend a lot of time trying to really coax and egg them on in the ground floor, it's like, come on, you really want to do this. It's a time-consuming process, so there has to be a volunteer component. I think it maybe be a costly endeavor if you're looking to find a paid person to be able to do that, and reliance on volunteers is always tricky. So you got to find that partnership and make it work. In terms of, I think, the big tips that we would suggest in terms of takeaways, that if you find the right teams, like, it kind of runs itself. Like, they'll give you ideas, and it's just a matter of stepping back and maybe offering some, help or suggestions, but letting it be theirs. They'll, be the ones to get their friends to show up or post flyers at their high schools, and that helps a ton. Let them help pick the topics, let them tell you what's engaging to them rather than guessing, because I definitely wouldn't have guessed all the things that were engaging to them, and I was really impressed by the things that they came up with. I mean, we had stuff talking about LGBTQ issues in our community, Black Lives Matter. They were talking about really serious topics that I was blown away by. And then that flexible and persistent, I think that's kind of our MO, that that we kind of roll with it, but we know that you just keep going, that it'll work out the way it's supposed to work out. We've also done a couple other events here in the library. TEDx Bloomington hosted a TEDx Bloomington Women live stream. That was kind of a fun event, again, capitalizing on the awesome resources of the library's auditorium here and being able to live stream this event. The people pay thousands of dollars to attend, and we're showing that content to our community for free by being able to piggyback off the use of this free space at the library. So that was a fun event, and we were able to invite some of our past TEDx Bloomington women speakers to come back and give updates about what they've done since giving their TEDx Bloomington talk. We've tried some salons, which is another TEDx format. These are designed to be a series of informal events, which can or can't, it's your choice, include live speakers. We did one on the power of a well-told tale, but storytelling, and we also did one called Death and Taxes about planning for end of life, which you would think would be really depressing, but ended up being a very engaging dialogue about how people don't really think about death. And those were really well attended, very successful events. And we're like, okay, well, let's do this on a regular basis. So we tried out a thing called TED Tuesday, where on a monthly basis, we were having different thematic collections of events. I should say that the salons, we found a curator specifically for those events that had expertise who curated those, whereas the TED Tuesday was just one of our TED volunteers picking a topic and hosting it. Those had mixed success, and we ended up discontinuing them, largely because TED told us you can't have a thing that you just made up. So that's where kind of the TED rules will sometimes intervene. So when we put in our request for our license for TEDx Women this year, they said, yeah, you can have that, but you've got to take care of this TED Tuesday thing. It can't exist anymore. So we no longer do TED Tuesdays, but we could continue to have salons, and they wouldn't be branded as TED Tuesdays. We would just have a series of salons. And again, those are just short, informal events.
So the big hang up was just that you branded a TED event in your own way. That was like the only issue.
They're very, and in fairness, they have a very valuable brand that they allow us to use for free, and we contribute content back to them for free. So it's a nice, mutually beneficial relationship. But they're very protective of that brand. So they don't want anything that's going to dilute it, and they don't want anything that's going to capitalize on it. And not that we were seeking funding for this, but you could see where other organizations might be like, we're having this TED event and we're charging $500 per person as a way to raise money. And that certainly wasn't the intent. So they understood the spirit of it. We knew that it was probably going to be an issue eventually, but every time you do a TED event, even if it's just a licensed live stream of something, you have to send out a survey to everyone who attends and get feedback and report on all the information. So there's a little bit of a bookkeeping thing, and we were trying to keep it informal and experiment with it a little bit more. So it was a learning process. In terms of next steps for audience members who might be interested in doing more, and we can certainly answer some questions, checking out TED.com just to get a sense of some of the speakers and topics that are out there might be a way to start. What's relevant in your community right now, what are the issues, figure out those kinds of things, because just to be able to show videos to people and talk about them, I mean, that's a really powerful experience, and we had found that both through the salons that we did and the TED Tuesday events. If you haven't already, check to see if there is already a TEDx group. I know we've had some people from Indy. There's definitely a TEDx Indianapolis that's a really strong and successful TEDx program. If there's anybody from Lafayette, I know that TEDx Purdue has had a really successful one, and I would imagine that there's probably a few more in the state of Indiana. I went to look and their website was down this morning. So you may not be able to check right now, but there are a lot, and that would be a good first step. So rather than reinvent the wheel, finding a group that you can partner with that's nearby. And then if you are interested, if there's not one and you want to start your own, that's something that you can go through to do on TED.com. And then once you're signed up, you can become part of the TEDx community. So they have a thing called the TEDx Hub, which has lots of great, event organization ideas, people from all over the world who are saying, this is what we've done, this is what works, or hey, this is my problem, what did you do? So it's a wonderful community for planning any kind of TED-related event in a local community. And then certainly with the TED Ed side of things, visiting the ed.ted.com site to learn a little bit more about that program would be a good next step if this is something that you want to adopt for your own facility. Anything you'd want to?
It's just fun to say ed.ted.com.
These are great URLs. And that's pretty much it. So I guess we're open to questions if we have a little bit of time.
Okay, so we have a few that have already been asked. So Shannon Brake had the question, for your TEDx events, for youth at least, do you have themes even for the regular TED Bloomington events?
So for a TEDx Bloomington event, you have a theme, but the theme can't be, like you couldn't have a TEDx Bloomington event just about sustainable living. That's a no-no. You could have a TEDx Bloomington, and that's why if you search for TEDx events, the names are often very nebulous. And so you're supposed to have a collection of a variety of different topics that relate tangentially to that theme. So not just all like this is only going to be education and they're all talks about education. They want a little bit more diversity, and so that is one of the TED kind of rules or goals. For a salon, however, you can be very specific. So for a salon event, you could say, hey, we're just going to talk about robotics in today's salon, and we're only going to show cool videos about robotics and talk about those, and that's acceptable. So there's a little bit of difference in terms of which format you do, in terms of how you can theme it.
So just for clarification, so you mentioned TEDx salons or TED salons. Do you have to have a TEDx license to be able to hold a salon?
Technically, to hold an official salon. So the advantage of that, though, is that you're listed on their website. So then you can, in addition to being able to brand it officially as like, hey, we're having this TEDx, XYZ library event today, and it's a TEDx salon. I was always on the fence as to whether people would understand what a salon is without going. There's a lot of jargon in the TED world. It's like, I know what a salon is, but somebody else may not. And then I saw somebody ask the question of a book club, that we kind of branded our TED Tuesday events like a book club that you don't have to read a book for. So you come and watch some videos and talk about them. But yeah, you do have to, if it is officially a salon event, then you go through the TED process. But you could still, I think, host an informal event, kind of like our TED Club. I mean, we were running TED Ed Club here, and we may or may not have been officially signed up for that. And so you could get around to doing that, and I don't think that there would be a lot of ramifications for it. Like I said, with TED Tuesday, it was basically a smack on the hand, like, hey guys, maybe you didn't know about this, but you need to sign up.
So, and not only is the how you name it, do they want to have a role in that, which makes sense. Like you said, it is their brand. But you also indicated to me in one of our conversations, Jennifer, that there's also a difference between whether you are simply watching content that's already been created and available for anyone with an internet connection who knows that YouTube exists, as opposed to creating content that you're slapping the TED brand on.
And that's definitely a difference. So like being official means that you have the ability to contribute to the TED library or the TEDx library of videos. So I think even with salons, you could have a live speaker and put that video up online for other people to see. And we've talked about doing that. So none of our TED Tuesday events or the salons featured a live speaker, but that was something that we could have explored kind of longer term. And if we do a more extended salon series, it's something that we could explore as well.
So we had a follow-up question. Do you have to apply for every salon, or is it just you apply for one organization license and then you can have salons?
You would apply. First off, you would need to establish a TEDx group, and then that group would apply for a salon license. And the salon license actually requires you to have multiple events. So they're designed to be a series rather than a one-off event. That was one of the things that kind of scared us away at the beginning, because we're like, well, we want to see if this works and see if people actually show up or if people like this before we commit to having, I think it's only 3. It's like 3, or not very many, but you commit over a 12-month period to host a series of salons. But yeah, you don't have to. You do not have to apply for every individual one, but the idea is that you would apply for an annual license that would cover that particular event.
Do we have any more questions for the presenters today? I see we have a few people typing.
And just to answer the person about the book club, I would say that's totally allowed. I think if a library just wanted to informally do that, like Kevin said, like it's freely available. These are things that are out on the internet. We had some really engaging conversations. Like it was fun. And again, we picked shorter videos, so you weren't sitting in a room for 18 minutes watching a video. We usually tried to pick 3 different videos that related to the topic, and then had a break for discussion after each one. Tried to pick questions and seed some questions in case people didn't have their own questions or comments to share from the videos. And those were pretty engaging conversations. And that's certainly something that you could do with or without a license. And I think if you did it with a license, it would probably be best fit for the salon format.
So what topics were surprising for you, specifically for like your teen events? Was there anything that you really weren't expecting a presenter to be really interested in, or just any of the programs that you did?
I was really impressed with how serious, like, I mean, like I mentioned, like the LGBTQ, because it was right around the time that we were talking about the bathroom, like the gendered bathroom discussions. So it was a big topic in the high schools, and to have, and not only was I impressed that a youth was willing to kind of come and talk about that, but that they took a very positive spin on it. Like, it wasn't about like, hey, it's not fair that we can't use like the bathroom that we prefer to use. It was all about like, these are the things that we do for members of our community to make them feel comfortable and to feel like they're included. And so really kind of talking about some of the organizational approaches that they've taken to working with youth that are facing those challenges and were facing issues in their day-to-day life where they might be uncomfortable. So just the seriousness of their topics are kind of surprising, but amazing. I mean, really, really cool.
Do you have any recommendations for TED book clubs? What would be recommended reading materials? I think that somebody shared a link to TED books.
Yeah, so. I was just gonna mention too. So TED releases kind of like the Oprah list. Like TED has a list of books, and oftentimes those tie into themes. And there probably are curated lists. So there is a TED blog as well. So if you are looking at probably at the point where those books were added to their book list, I would imagine that there were probably referenced videos that linked into them. And oftentimes I think the authors that are picked for their book club list are also people who have been past TEDx or TED presenters. So there's probably some logical tie-ins there.
Well, do you have any tips or advice for expanding this into adult programming? Or are you planning on having an adult component in the future?
So the TED Tuesdays and the salons were adult oriented. We said all ages, but those I don't think we had any youth attend those events, and they worked really well as adult events. TED Women, again, wasn't designed specifically for adults. It was all ages, but it was adults who attended the live stream of the TED Women program. So I think that those are things that are probably just all ages friendly, although I would say most of the talks, especially on the live streams, do skew toward adult audiences, that there's things that probably aren't as appropriate toward youth audiences. Whereas, if you can get the live stream of these events, that's just free, awesome programming. And to be able to market something as like people, and we say that people are paying thousands of dollars for these tickets, and you're watching the same thing live as it happens and getting to see it for free in your own comfort and awesomeness of your own community. So those are definitely, I mean, it's worth pursuing a license or partnering with an organization just to have the ability to do that, if nothing else. And that's a really simple, low-hanging fruit in terms of easy programming. And those events happen, I would say there's probably opportunities for live streams at least 3 or 4 times a year, because there's TED Global, the big TED conference, TED Women, and then TED Youth, which I don't think is happening this year, but it happened annually for the last 2 years and probably will again soon.
And Dana Harper asked, how could you have done TED Tuesday without getting in trouble with TED? So I think that they did get a little slap on the wrist. It was just like an email or a letter.
Yeah, we were basically told to sign up for salons, which we had already, we can play dumb to a certain extent, but we knew we probably should have signed up for the salon. It just would have been a little bit more paperwork. And at the point where we committed to doing it on a monthly basis, we probably should have signed up. The first 2 that we did as more kind of one-offs was kind of to experiment with the format, and because those were a little bit more involved, we're like, okay, we're shifting gears now. We want something that's a little less work intensive in terms of prepping and finding a host, and really having more engaging activities for participants, shifting more to the book club thing. But really, all you would have to do to not get in trouble for it is to establish a TEDx organization and to sign up for that salon license. And follow the rules. I should say there are always rules, and they do change from time to time. So that's the other thing. So things that you have to keep reading the rules because they do update them. And I would say more or less they'll give you the tap on the hand saying no, hey, this is not this rule that you may or may not have known about. So they are pretty polite about it in terms of following up. The other thing that just is a little caveat, that because of the volume that they're dealing with, thousands of organizations all over the world, timeliness of response is sometimes a problem. So if you're planning to do something, like if you want to do one of these live streams, you need to plan several months in advance so that you can get everything approved and get the links and get all of the information that you need to be able to do this. Technically, you're not supposed to start marketing event until it's been formally approved. And sometimes that process can take upwards of a month to 2 months, depending on how backlogged they are for applications.
Do you have to pay any kind of like fees associated with getting a license?
Nope.
Yay!
No, but there, okay, so, and this is another place where there's a little bit of a technicality. Technically, to get a license, the person applying for the license has to have been to a TED event, like so a big TED event. And because the cost of those events are very significant and you have to apply and be accepted to attend most of them, that's the hurdle. And so when we started our TEDx Bloomington organization, we did so from, it was actually gifted to us from a person who didn't even live in Bloomington at the time, but had been to that event and really wanted Bloomington to have the event. So he applied for the license on our behalf.